Hello friends, it's Mr. Squiggs here. Today we're going to start a new game of Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. This game has been in development for a long time and now it's finally starting to reach a sort of semi-finished state. So I think it's a good time to do a new playthrough for anyone who hasn't had a chance to see this game yet. This game is a city building, nation building game. It's punishingly complex and difficult, so I wanted to do a video that could be friendly to new and returning players alike, and we're going to go ahead and jump in. So I like to do an island map, pretend that I'm in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the Pacific or something like that. The historical idea of this game is that you're some Eastern European nation playing both sides of the street between the West and the Soviet Union. So you're one of those semi-democratic, semi-communist Eastern European nations. So this brings in a lot of interesting economic decisions. There's two currencies in the game, but we're going to dive right in. So we're starting with two major built-in challenges, which are that I'm using a mod. I'm going to use a lot of mods in this playthrough, but I'm using an island map with no customs house at the border. So that means to buy and sell stuff, most of the time we're going to have to send ships out across the water to the map edge, and I kind of like that idea of isolation, and it makes it a bit more challenging. The second thing is we are starting with zero population. It's a map with no population. Makes it extra hard. We need to build every industry from scratch. So if you're wondering how to do that and how to get going, then this is a good video for you. Now, there are some trade-offs, which is that we can't make it work with the hardest possible settings, unfortunately. And it's because it'll be simply impossible to do certain things. One of the most recent additions to the game was this realistic mode. This realistic mode prevents you from instantly building things with money and from instantly purchasing things with money. So if we have no port and no ships, we have no way of building a port, for example. We would be required to send a ship to the map edge and bring back the materials we need before we even have a port to unload them. So for this playthrough, at least at the beginning, I'm going to disable the actual realistic mode so that we can build a couple buildings from cash. We may turn it on later. I am in favor in general of a realistic experience, and the game has a built-in feature, which is when you buy things for money, you usually pay cost of delivery. You usually pay, it's approximately a 30% premium over what you'd pay if you send a vehicle to the map edge, to a customs house, to buy it. So even if we turn this off, we're still strongly encouraged to play as realistically as we can and not magically buy things with cash. Everything else I'm pretty much going to leave on the harder settings. For vehicle availability, I sometimes like to buy old vehicles if I like them, so I like to start back in 1960 as well. And some of these I'll just put to normal. I guess I like a medium hard experience. Things like the waste and demolition, there's more gameplay if we leave it on demolition, but things like the building fires, frequent doesn't change any gameplay. Really, it doesn't, except that we might need more fire stations, but there's no extra gameplay. Same thing with education. To have universities, you need it as complex. And the last thing I'll mention is I might, just at the beginning, turn off researches. I might turn this back on. There is a way in the game to turn it back on, but it's just that at the very beginning of the game, I like to see where the resources are. And if you enable this, you can't see them at all. So the one last thing I'll do is, because we are on an island map, I will give us a little bit more starting money. We'll start medium instead of hard. It's hard enough, even with medium money. I think it's about 5 million rubles, if I'm not mistaken. It's really hard to get started just with that. The hard is basically impossible with the map settings that I've chosen. So everything else will basically, yeah, unsatisfied citizens, maybe again I'll leave that on medium. It's like the building fires. You don't get much extra gameplay. People just move away faster if they don't have what they need, and they'll already move away pretty quick on reasonable if we don't give them the things we need. So everything else I think looks pretty good so far. So with that, we'll start a new game. Okay, so we're in February of 1960. I'm going to go ahead and pause the game already, just so we can take a look at our beautiful empty map. And one of the things I like to do when I'm starting from zero is just get a feel for where the resources are. When we're setting up various industry chains, it's going to be important that we're not too far from the good resources. However, so let's just take a look. Bauxite, uranium, oil, iron, and coal. However, exploiting most of these resources and the related industries that process what comes out generally produce a lot of pollution. So we want to start building somewhere where we're close enough that we can get workers there, but far enough that our workers are not going to be directly exposed to too much pollution. Over the course of the game, that really will impact their health. So shipping workers out to a polluted area, that's fine, but you don't want them living in that area. You don't want the kids exposed to that. So already here I'm noticing a little area kind of around here on the map, in between some coal here and some oil here. Just by the way, this map is based off the real-world island of Flinders Island, which, if I'm not mistaken, is in the strait between Tasmania and mainland Australia. I'll put a link down to the talented mod creator who created this. One of the reasons I like this map is because it's got a good diversity of terrain. You've got some bigger hills and mountains, but really it's got this nice, flat, buildable area, which is very important in this game. This game, it's not like SimCity or Cities Skylines. You're not going to have predefined levels or grades, and I think the topography is even more complicated than in Cities Skylines. Cities Skylines will at least sort of flatten an individual lot for you, or at least tell you where things are. But in this game, it's not till you really build a building that it'll let you know how much land needs to be flattened. And in reality, it's a good idea to flatten land first ourselves. I also like this nice flat edge here where we can build a port. I was sort of tempted. I like this funky kind of triangular bit here, but I'm actually going to avoid it. A, because I don't want to be too close to this lagoon. B, there's some coal here, and it might actually just be a little too close to coal that we might exploit. So I'm actually sort of looking at this sort of flat-ish area around the coast here for our first kind of basic port town, and there's a good amount of flat land. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to find sort of the biggest, what I am going to consider my zero area, my flat area. I'm going to build a cheapo, if there's a free one, construction office. There we go, construction office free. I'm using a lot of mods in this game. I love having mods. They're practically essential. However, if you don't want to use them, you can always tell the mods all have this green down arrow that they're downloaded. So you'll see when I'm using vanilla objects. I'll try to use vanilla objects wherever I can, wherever it's appropriate. So here we've got to auto build things using rubles. I'm going to change that to build from resources because we're going to start out just by doing a bit of terraforming. We're just going to slightly smooth out and slightly flatten this area and throw down a couple other buildings. This building gets built right away because it's free. It has no material costs. It's basically a square of dirt. That's very rare in this game. Every building's going to require at least some manpower, at least some labor, some gravel before it'll be open for us to use. The reason I wanted to plop down a crappy little free one first is because we need to buy some vehicles right away in order to do some terraforming. So I'm just gonna get a default little bulldozer, and maybe we need an excavator. I think it only actually uses the excavator, but sometimes it complains if we don't have both. So don't worry about the grass, it will grow back, but I'm just with a big brush gonna do some very basic flattening and smoothing of some of this terrain around here. And it is using the bulldozer. I might get a second one of those. These are not a waste of money at this stage in the game. We're going to need a bulldozer for almost every road, every gravel road we ever build. So getting that second one will allow me to flatten a little faster. So what's going on here is that we're terraforming without spending money. If you look up at the top, our rubles and our dollars, they shouldn't really be changing while I'm doing this. They're using their proximity to the office, the construction office that I built, and in theory they're using the gasoline in the tank of these items. So if I ever unpause the game, these might leave. We might leave the construction office in search of a gas station, and it might block me from using them until they get some gasoline. So it's semi-realistic, but it's definitely going to be a huge savings compared to spending cash. Terraforming using cash gets very expensive very quickly. So that's why I wanted to throw down this cheapo construction office and get a couple vehicles and do it myself right away. So we're just going to keep smoothing out a little bit along the coast here, just enough space to set up a little port area and a couple of buildings, and then we'll develop out further from there. Okay, so it might be pretty good just to get started. So, in case it's not obvious, there is no way to trade with the outside world except for sending a sailing ship past this border to either the US, the West, which there I think they've called Zvenjamin, or it's not near Gani, that's what they've named ours, but the opposite corner of the map there, Sejov, is the sort of Soviet bloc side. So we do have these two options. I am building on the west coast, I should say the east coast, but the coast that's closer to the west. I guess it's backwards in this map. I guess we're in the North Pacific or something like that. But we're not going to be able to trade with the world without a port. It's the single most important building we can build at this point. So I'm actually going to go ahead and I'll get a dock. A dock is a parking spot for ships, so I might get the cheapest, easiest sort of offshore anchor, just so we'll be able to buy some ships. But where ships actually do loading and unloading, it's at these harbors. So I'll do, let's say maybe a medium, or just small. A medium or a small cargo harbor. Let's see what the small looks like. And if it'll let us build it. Yeah, the small looks pretty good. The small looks pretty good. So, we'll go ahead and plop that down here. Now, we can basically build with no fear as long as this is checked and the game is paused. Everything that we put down, it's going to appear in this sort of blueprint format where it just shows us the general shape of the building and it doesn't do anything yet. It tells us all the resources that are going to be required to build this building. Now, I have no way, it's a catch-22. I have no way of producing these resources yet. I have no domestic population yet. There's nobody that's going to come and build this. And this is why it's death to select realistic mode from the start when you're on a map with no population. Someone's going to have to come and build this. And really what's going to happen is we're going to end up pushing probably this button, fund construction from rubles, and spending the 63 grand. And that's going to include the materials, the shipping, and the work days. But even when I push that button, nothing's going to happen till we start the clock and actually start in real time. But it does happen suspiciously quickly. It does go up in just a day or two when you buy from dollars or rubles, and I think that's why a lot of the players say, hey, that's unrealistic. We should not do that, and we should have a mode for avoiding that, because even if you're paying, even if we say, fine, we're paying for foreign labor to come and build it, it does happen very, very quickly. The next thing that we're going to need is a warehouse. I like a particular mod with warehouses that combine a whole bunch of different storages. Generally, the game has different types of goods, as you can see, and different types of goods actually need different types of storage buildings. So I like one that combines many into one, specifically this combined cargo storage building, which I love. It has road connections, it has rail connections, and you can store almost everything except vehicles. Which is not a big concern for me at this point, that it does not let us store vehicles, because by the time we have any vehicles or containers to export, this tiny port, it's not going to meet our needs. We're going to need to move on to something bigger and better. But everything else, whether it's imports or exports, this one little warehouse will do us just fine. So that's sort of the absolute minimum for imports. Now, one of the really key things that we're going to need to have on this map is exports. We are going to be blowing through a lot of cash at the beginning. We're probably going to be importing food. Even if we choose to produce food, that's going to be at the expense of something else. So I'm going to want to have some industry right at the very beginning that's going to produce something that we might actually export. And I like to go agriculture based at the beginning, just because when you have no population, it's one of the easiest industries. If I build a mine for coal or iron and a steel mill, that sort of thing, it's gonna require a lot of workers right away. And so I'm either gonna have to house them right next door to that polluting industry and invest in a whole town right near polluting industry, or invest in an expensive railway. All that is stuff I don't want to do right now, to be frank and honest. I want the cheapest industry that needs just a few workers that I can bus them to it if I need to. So I might go ahead and plop down a budget sort of vanilla distillery. And what we can then do, if this is all connected up to this one warehouse, I can just deliver crops to this warehouse and deliver workers to this distillery. That's it. It's as simple as that. The distillery is going to produce alcohol, which is a nice export product, and it's already going to be in the warehouse where the ships expect to pick it up. So it's going to be very convenient. So I'm going to go ahead and just plop one of those down. Maybe we'll do a second one eventually. I don't know. We'll see. For now, we're going to start small. We're going to start like that. For the roads, they have different speeds. The only ones that get built instantly are these sort of mud roads. So I might, I like using them just to sketch things out, but then sort of your standard road, your standard roadway at the beginning, it's really definitely going to be the sort of gravel roads. They're cheap to build. You can go 60k, which if you're talking about buses or big trucks in the 1960s, 60k is plenty. We were not going to gain tremendous efficiency by spending a lot of money doing asphalt roads. Eventually, we'll want to have all asphalt roads. By the time we're hitting the 80s, most of the vehicles will be able to go 80, 90, 100k. So there really will be a big benefit to having asphalt roads then. But as you'll see, they require a lot more expertise, different equipment, versus the gravel roads. And of course, when we're just still sketching everything out, I always use mud roads because they are absolutely free. So it's good to see where the roads will actually go before we pay for them. do sometimes get some snapping issues, which is another reason I like to sketch all my roads out first. And for some reason where I've placed this, it doesn't want to give me an intersection right where I've placed this. It's a bit of a gripe that a lot of people have with this game, that you have this this snapping feature that lets you build these nice straight roads, but sometimes it doesn't want to put them exactly where we want them. But maybe I'll clean that up. Yeah, I don't like this so much. I think I'm gonna just do a T intersection there. There we go. So, we will discuss population soon, and how we get a population, how we build a residential area. But before we do that, before we set up any other buildings, before we even dream of it, I want to talk about waste management. I want to think about waste management. I want to maybe go see how far we can terraform while we do that. So it's one of the more recent, when this game was getting started, it was almost all about setting up different infrastructure chains, different production chains, mine something, turn it into something else, transport it, consume it, export it. That was the focus. More recently, in the last year, they've released a lot of the features related to sewage and waste and demolition, and basically end of life of various industry chains. Where does your stuff go when you're done using it? And as they drop these extra features, these extra layers of complexity in this game, I admit sometimes I found it a little bit frustrating, but it does make it more realistic, and it does provoke some interesting thoughts about city planning. So before we even look at the supply side, the beginning of the life of all these chains, all these production chains that we'll set up, I want to look at the end of life. I want to look at where does the garbage go? Where does the sewage go? Because just like with heavy industry, that is something that we don't want our people living right next door to right away. So again, around here, what I'm showing on the mini-map here is that there's an area here that's really rich in oil reserves, and it'll be nice to have proximity to that. But oil really produces a lot of pollution. But that might ironically make this area around, I'm guessing around this little bay, a good area for eventual waste disposal. So I'm just going to keep flattening out along the coast a little area. We'll probably just put one little road, but we're just going to go as far as we can. Just get out of our immediate port town so that we're not super close to where people will be living. But I'm just going to flatten out a little bit more and set up a place for sewage to basically be dumped into the ocean that will be pretty far from where people will live. It's too much terraforming. It's too much terraforming at the beginning. But believe me, this is one of the flatter island maps. Most of these maps, they are generated from height maps, of real-world maps, and you don't have a uniform flat surface. You have things like tree cover. You have things like the natural variations in the actual terrain height that get captured in those images, or even just blurriness results in a lot more peaks and valleys. And really what we look for in this game is these contours. The thicker the contour, the more that's a big height difference. And the redder, the hotter the color of the contour, the more it is a steep grade with different heights on the two sides of it. So here, yeah, we've got a lot of thick white contours, but in most of the island maps I've seen, there's way more dimples. There's dimples everywhere. There's literally no flat space, and they're usually red and yellow and orange. So to have relatively big, flat-ish spaces that are also smooth, also a white contour, that's a big advantage. of this map. So, we're going to go ahead and look at plumbing, and like I said, we're going to do sewage. I'm just going to take a vanilla sewage discharge. So we're going to really try to keep people from living far, far away from this sewage discharge, because especially at the beginning, when we have almost no population, we are not going to be able to afford to do sewage treatment. I'm going to go ahead and put down maybe a small sewage treatment plant, but to be honest, this isn't going to get built at the very beginning. What's going to happen is at the beginning we're gonna build a sewer out to here, but we won't build the sewage plant itself right away. And I'll show you what's going to happen. I think we're just going to use a simple switch. So I'll go ahead and I'll put a sewage switch here. I'll already put some large sewage pipes. We'll just show you the underground view. Another feature of this game I love is that just like when you're building buildings, how it will show them in this blueprint mode, there's this secondary blueprint mode where when you're doing infrastructure, the roads, the pipes, the power lines, it really does give you a true blueprint. So then you can decide, am I building it from money? What am I doing? You get this window. It tells you what it would cost to just build it from cash. And maybe we'll come back later and build it from cash. But for now, I'm just turning it into a blueprint. The reason that it's very important to put a switch right here is because at the beginning, our sewage will come in here and it'll go straight out. But one day we'll build this plant, this treatment plant, and we will already want it to be hooked up correctly. And I could build a second pipe that just goes direct, but as cities grow, it's a principle that has to do with building from scratch, from zero population. As cities grow, the needs of our various networks, they don't just grow in brute terms, they change unexpectedly. So we want to have flexibility, whether it's power, whether it's water, whether it's sewage. I really value that flexibility. So you'll see me plopping down a lot of these switches, maybe sometimes in places where there isn't necessarily a need. Well, that's going to prevent a lot of rework later. That's going to prevent us having to completely rebuild entire sewer systems further down the line. So if it looks odd when I'm putting a switch somewhere, that's why. So, we already know we're going to need to build probably a road out to there, probably a sewage pipe out to there, and we'll see what else as we get going. The other thing that I like to do is keep waste together. So at the beginning, again, we're not going to be able to do too much waste sorting, but we can at least build a dump. We'll at least build a couple of free little dumps just to get us started, just to have a place to store the garbage far from our citizens. And the reason we really need a road out here apart from the dumps is just that for fires, it's good to have all your buildings connected. Once I build this sewage discharge, there is some possibility that it catches fire. And I'm going to want, once we've got a fire station set up, it will be really nice if that fire station and the fire trucks are capable of reaching this area. And they do use the footpaths. I love that the game makes heavy use of these pedestrian footpaths. Emergency vehicles will use them if there's no alternative. Okay. So, I might do some terraforming further north, just again because the port itself can cause a bit of pollution, but I want to build up further north and maybe put the center of our first little town somewhere, halfway to that closest mountain, somewhere up there. So at this point I'm going to probably skip ahead a bit and do some more terraforming, but once we're done the terraforming, you'll see we'll actually start to get to build a little bit of a town. Okay, it's a lot of terraforming. You don't know how much time, you don't want to know how much time I just spent on that. But I do it because I actually hate doing it. I do it because a little bit of terraforming at the beginning will save us in the long run. And in this case, we're not going to flatten the entire map, but it is true that we are doing sort of a downtown here. This area is going to be high-value land someday, we hope, and high-access land that's going to be at the center of a lot of our networks of transportation, of water, of power, whatever. So I'm just going to extend these two roads out as long and as straight as we can make them. Okay, great. So this is really where we'll start setting up our first residential areas. And I know we ruined a lot of grass and trees. Don't worry, the grass will grow back. The trees we will put back, maybe just a few, just nice and decorative. But really, in terms of just the sheer amount of buildings and different infrastructure that we're going to be putting into this area, it really, really helps to have it all flattened and clear at the beginning. Because then as the plan changes, as we put things away, down and take them away again, it's going to be nice knowing that the land won't need to be reshaped every single time. And that we really will have this sort of nice, flat, reusable, repurposable space where we can put buildings close together if we want to. That's one of the things, that's one of the most important things with the terraforming. If you leave a big area that's not flat and you put a bunch of buildings down, each building is going to need to be fully flat at its foundation. So each building is going to change the contours at its edges. You can see a bit what I mean by here. As soon as I put down this building, I didn't fully flatten out the space well enough. So now, to keep it completely flat under the footprint of the building, we now have a contour that goes around the building. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's not a big deal here where most of the land is mostly flat, but still, if we hadn't have taken the time to pave this out and then I start putting buildings down, we would be creating these mini contours, these mini steps between the buildings that are built on higher land and the buildings that are built on lower land. And that takes up space. That limits how close we can put things together. And so that's why that's one that I wanted to avoid. So like I said, I guess we're going halfway between the mountain and the water-ish. So I'm going to go close to this end and maybe do some intersection here. And again, it really doesn't seem to want to line up perfectly. Oh well. I guess it's the distance that I put these two roads at. The point for one on one side is in between points for the other. But that's okay. I'll just turn off the snapping and we will just eyeball it. Okay. Good enough. So, I'm gonna kind of do a little bit of a grid idea at the beginning. Hear me out. I'm in favor of roundabouts. I like to leave space at my intersections so that crowded four ways can be turned into roundabouts. And really what I like to create are loops. Loops that buses or trams can transit through. Oof, the tool's really fighting me today. That's a shame. Now we're just gonna basically sketch out some blocks. I didn't even properly measure. It's not even square. Oh well. So if you're like me, your OCD is probably acting up because we're not getting perfectly square and perfectly straight roads. It's something we're gonna have to live with. The snapping of the roads, I suppose I could be turning it off, but it's something that we're gonna live with, and we might not have to live with it forever. If we leave a good enough buffer between our buildings and our roads, it is something we can fix later, which is why I'm tending to sketch out with the cheapest roads possible first, and just kind of, you know, get a feel for where things are going to go. So we can always delete and re-add them later. And in fact, we will. We will have to. We will have to build and rebuild many of these roads many times, and that's just a part of the game. Okay, I think that's all we need for a basic road system at the very beginning. We'll probably come in and slightly adjust these when we turn them into gravel roads, but now I just want to start plopping down a few buildings just to get a feel for where things are going to go. So one of the other things I'll do is I will create a town name If I click on this Mirgeni that they gave us for the port town, you can see it extends pretty far. So I might just recenter it, rename it. I think I'm going to name my towns after Ukraine. I'm going to get rid of Mirgeni. And what did we say? Halfway to the mountain. The mountain's about there. Yeah, I'm just barely getting into it there. So I think this last fully enclosed block is going to actually be the center of our town. And what will I call it? I'll call it Lviv. How about it? Okay. And you'll see right away we get 4 blocks out to the border with Odessa, approximately. So we'll get that in all directions. So we will eventually expand this city in other directions, and maybe we will do a bit more terraforming at that time. But for now, just this linear space between here and the port, it's going to be plenty of room to get started. Now, we need to talk about the buildings that we're going to need absolutely 100% at the beginning. So, what do people need? They've put it all in this for citizen. I'm not going to talk so much about the utilities, but we will need to leave spaces for them. We will need to build some electrical substations, some clean water stations, some dirty water stations, and district heating. Those of us in North America, this is a mystery. There's very few of them set up, but it was very common in the Soviet Union, and it's gaining popularity with green technology. District heating can be a very efficient way to do heating of air and water when you have a lot of buildings, a lot of density close together. Basically, you have one specialized heating plant that actually heats the water or the air, and then that is piped out into the nearby buildings. And this can be a big savings versus every building having maybe more capacity than it needs, and maybe a less efficient setup than it could have, because every building wants to be sure they'll have enough heating, so you end up having way more capacity that's not as efficiently used versus doing it centrally. And I do believe winter is on. So I'm well aware that this island in real life is in the South Pacific, but I guess we are saying we're further north or further south, somewhere that would get lots of snow, because I think we're going to have a snowy winter. So we'll go back to these residential areas. There's sort of 2 kind of absolutely essential things, the most essential things. Almost everything in here is essential, but grocery stores, if the buildings are not near them, workers will not be produced in the housing. People need to be able to walk to a shopping center to get food and other essentials. It's non-negotiable. The other thing, I think they've got it under state infrastructure, under children. Schools and kindergartens. The schools are absolutely essential for education, sure, for our younger pops to become skilled workers, but the kindergartens are even more necessary. Our workers have a virtual concept of who their family is. And once they have children, if there's not a kindergarten in range to watch their children, they are not going to work. They're gonna say they're too far away from a kindergarten. So we're going to need one of those right away too. Those are sort of the most essential that everyone needs in range of them. So we will build many eventually. There are things that you sort of don't need right away, or mainly just need one of. We are going to need police and courts. That's one of the more buggy features of the game right now, is if we don't have a courthouse right from the beginning, we'll get a lot of criminals. We need a prison, we need a police station, we need a courthouse. The secret police is optional. I usually don't build any, but maybe I should. Maybe that would help the fight against crime, because I tend to end up with a lot of criminals in my recent games that I've played. So we're gonna need a school. That's also non-negotiable. Let's find a pretty one. So the orphanage is another one that's important for crime fighting. Basically, orphans, if they're not raised in an orphanage, they grow up to be criminals. Another one we like, I like to get a technical university where adults can get some education as well. And this one has the added bonus of having a really big picture of Vladimir Lenin on it. I don't know quite how I feel about that. It's always a weird game for me to be playing because I'm not quite sure that I'm a bearded Marxist yet. And they have, I think I'll go with this fabulous vanilla city hall with this very fun and funky triangular chamber that it's got attached to it. It's really nice. We don't need this right away, but it will improve the accuracy of the statistics about the local area. And I think I'm going to go ahead and put some emergency services near there. A hospital or a clinic, also absolutely essential. It doesn't need necessarily to be in walking distance, but it really does need to have road access and have ambulances that will go and get sick people. So once we start plopping down residences, those residences will give us an error message. They will tell us how often ambulances are not arriving when they should, when they ought. Fire station, so important. So important. It really sucks to have stuff burned down right away early when you've just built it. Take it from me. I think that police station is a little close to the road, but that's something we can fix before we build it. And again, I'm not on buying anything from cash. I'm all build from resources. And there's no resources being produced. There's no construction office that's close enough. So really, we're going to build most of this from cash. We're going to have to come through and bite the bullet, and it's going to be thousands. It's going to be thousands for every building, which is why this 4.5 million rubles we've got, it's going to get eaten up quickly. Unless we have a minimum base of most of this, we're not going to get anything working. We're not going to have workers coming out of our buildings. So another thing I like to put near the middle at the very beginning is a bus stop. Eventually, I'll use trams. I love trams, but at the beginning, there's just no alternative. We need bus stops to move people around. If we don't move our workers around, no work is going to get done. Another one that's nice to keep near-ish to your population center is a heating plant, or at least a heating exchange. That's a heat pumping station. We're really going to need a heat exchanger. Right, and it's already showing us all the buildings that are going to be in range of this particular heat exchanger. Another thing that's very important, I put down all these schools and things, but it's sports facilities. People like to have them close, and it's a really good and cheap way of keeping people healthy. It's important that that we have some indoor facilities as well, because we are on a map that'll have snow, and our outdoor sports fields will close and will not serve anybody in the snow. So I'm gonna just try to find maybe the smaller vanilla courthouse. I usually, this is like the police station, and in reality, it might not get built right away, but I'm gonna try to build it earlier than I normally would, because I always end up with too many criminals. Okay, so things we want close but not too close. Heating plant, road maintenance depots that will collect garbage and that will plow our snowy roads in the winter. So you know what, I might actually leave that for the next episode. We're running out of time for today, but in the next episode we're really going to actually activate and build some of this, hook up water, hook up power, and get some housing going. But we've got a nice little blueprint sketched out, so if you want to see it actually come to life, tune in next time. Once again, I'm Mr. Squiggs, and this is Workers and Resources, Soviet Republic. Have a good one.